They took control. They punted. They punished. Okay, and what percentage of your capability did they get? Now, we can't calculate the average across this group. We actually did a survey, but you know what? Shout out a few numbers. 10, 0, ooh. Okay, this isn't a contest to the bottom. 35. And we actually did survey this. I'll show you what we found in our research and also in this poll. What did they believe to be true? Let me ask you to think about your multiplier. What did your multiplier do? They encouraged, they empowered, they valued, they challenged. I want you to be as behaviorally specific with me as possible. They gave you freedom. They trusted, they asked questions, they defined a goal, they gave you confidence, they inspired, they taught. What did they believe to be true? What assumptions did they hold about you and about your capability? They believed that you were smart. I spent 2 years researching this, studying and analyzing how diminishers led, what they did with multipliers, how they thought, and you know what it came down to? Something as simple as the multiplier believes that people are smart and they're going to figure it out. How do you lead when you believe that everyone on your team, your management team, your volunteer staff is smart and they're going to figure it out? How do you believe when you hold the diminisher assumption that nobody's going to figure it out without me, my help? It takes us down a very, very different path of leadership. What percentage of your capability did your multiplier get? 95. 110, a rebel number. I love that. A scale of 0 to 100, 110. We found that in our research. It was fascinating, the dynamics that drove. We wanted to hear from as many of you as possible. So the Willow Creek Association staff and I, we put out a little survey about a week ago, and let me show you what you said your diminishers and multipliers did. So if we can pull up that slide. The diminishers, they didn't listen, they were controlling, they did not delegate, they micromanaged, they were selfish. Now I think the selfish is probably reflective of really just being self-absorbed. How do I get more of me? How do I get my brain out to everyone else as opposed to how do I orient out and use all of the brain power in the room, the logic of a multiplier? We found that, out of 100% of your capability, the diminishers got on average 43%. So the little sampling we did of this community was very close to what we found in our research, which I'll share in a minute. On the multiplier side, you said that the multipliers had a vision. They listened, they communicated, they trusted, they empowered. And the percentage of your capability, on average, 91%. I mean, what does this tell us? What does it tell us about our use of capability and talent inside of our organizations? When I looked at all of the individual responses, there was a couple that stood out to me. Someone said their diminisher was a stress troll. Their multiplier was a trust guru. Somebody else said their diminisher had an attitude of it's my way or the highway. And we've all worked for that person. Their multiplier let the team drive. Here's what we found in our research, and we studied this with this logic that diminishers have of nobody else is going to figure this out without me. They tend to do a number of things very, very differently than multipliers. So maybe we can pull this graphic up and you can see what we found. The first is how they manage talent. Diminishers tend to be empire builders. They love to hire smart people. They love to acquire smart people. But they don't utilize them fully. In fact, people become like little knickknacks in grandma's curio cabinet, like pretty little objects on display, but not particularly well utilized. The environment they create, they tend to be tyrants, and they're not often these yelling, chair-throwing, egomaniac tyrants. They're just people who create stress. What happens to our brains when we experience stress and anxiety? You know, the cognitive psychologists would give us this complicated answer, but really we physiologically get stupid for a time. And then the 18 minutes they say it takes to reboot our brains once that stressor has left the environment. The way they set direction, they tend to be know-it-alls. They set direction based on what they see and what they know. But they rarely ask other people to do things they don't know how to do. I mean, how would that limit your organization, your ministry, if you couldn't ask people to solve problems that you haven't already solved before? When it comes to the important decisions, they're decision makers. They hold them in close, in an inner circle, a council of one perhaps. And, you know, they delegate the small decisions. We find that they often spend their time making, and they make good decisions, which is why this is tricky, but they spend a lot of time running around trying to get buy-in across the community for decisions they've already made. You know, the multiplier approach is to let people weigh in, to counsel, because when people get to weigh in on something difficult and important, you've built all the buy-in that you need in the process. These diminishers also tend to be micromanagers. It gets done, but they have to be there. And we found in our research that get less than half of people's capability. I think we've got the numbers up here to show that. Going over onto the multiplier side, we found that these leaders begin with this logic. You know, what do you do when you believe that people around you are smart and they're going to figure it out? What do you do when you believe your children are smart and will figure it out? You know, what does it cause you to do? What do you not have to do? They lead in a very different way than the diminishers. The way they manage talent, they tend to become talent magnets. They identify people's genius. Like Coach Gelwick saying, John, you're fast. You have a gift for speed. They identify that genius and then help people put it to work at its fullest, at the most important problems and opportunities of the organization. When it comes to work environment, they're liberators. They create space for people to do their very best thinking, but it's a bit of a deal, an exchange. I'm going to give you space, but what do you owe me back in return? What do you owe me? You owe me your best thinking. They oblige people to give their best thinking to their work. They're challengers. They ask people to do hard things. In Pastor Bill's term, they make the big ask. They ask for the bold move. They invite people into this space of difficult and challenge, and they don't apologize for this invitation. They're debate makers. They're investors. When it comes to executing, they give other people the responsibility. They put other people in charge. And again, in Pastor Bill's language, I was reading Acts, you know, they create owners, not hirelings, in their organization. People own the work they're accountable for. We found that they get almost all of people's capability. 95% is what came out of our research, very similar to what we found in this community just a week ago. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When people described working for diminishers, they said the experience was frustrating and it was exhausting. When they described working for multipliers, what words did they use? I kept track of this and did an analysis. They said, honestly, it was exhausting, but it was exhilarating. Hard but fun. But you know, when you add this data together, I find it fascinating that working at half of our capability, 48%, 43%, is exhausting. It kills us. But working at all of our capability, giving a full offering, giving everything that we have to our work, our full intellect, it's exhilarating. You know, as we also studied this, admittedly, I've studied these extremes, trying to understand the differences, but what I found is that most of us sit somewhere on a spectrum, and a lot of us sit in this place on the spectrum that I call the accidental diminisher. You know, what's the accidental diminisher? This is the good manager, the good leader, the person who's following popular management practice. This is the person who goes to management training. People like us here congregated to learn about leadership, following popular management practice, but having a diminishing effect without knowing it. And often having a diminishing effect despite having good intentions. You know, it makes me wonder, is it possible that we do our greatest damage when we hold our most noble intentions? You know, for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to invite you to just think with me, how might we be having a diminishing impact without realizing it? How might we be shutting down smart, capable people, yet aspiring to be great leaders? Let me share with you a few of the ways that we find this is true. Now, full disclosure, these are a lot of things that I struggle with. Not to the least of which is the very first, which is the idea guy. Now the idea guy, this is the creative person, the innovator. These are people like me that are just like a fountain of ideas. We kind of just like burst through the doors of work and be like, hey, well what about this? And we could do this. And I was just at a conference, I was at the summit, and then I went on a run and I was thinking this, and they just are brimming with ideas and innovation. How could this be diminishing? Their intent isn't that their ideas are better. We don't think our ideas are better most of the time. We think that our ideas will spark other ideas. Right? But what actually happens around the idea guy? What happens when you have a fountain of ideas? And feel free to shout it out. Nothing gets done because we chase. We're like, hey, that sounds pretty good. I like that. Ooh, she's got another one today. And we start to chase, and pretty soon we're just like, you know what, I'm just going to stay right here. It's where I end up. Or we stop thinking, we think, I don't have to worry about my pretty little head, because if I need an idea, I know where the fountain is. I'll go there. You know, what about the leader who's always on? This is a person who's always engaged, always present, always big, always something to say. Full of energy. What happens around the always-on leader? I mean, this is like the human being that doesn't have an off switch. What happens around them as they expand like a gas to take all the available space in the meeting? I'd say something if I could breathe, you know? And then what do we do to this leader, the human without the off switch? What do we do?
She's a good teacher.
To them? Yeah, we tune them out, and what do they begin to sound like to us? Okay, like Charlie Brown's teacher, the voice of the teacher, you know, and you know, they think they're big, they think they're being articulate, and we hear nothing from these leaders. What about the rescuer? This is the good person. This is the person that doesn't like to see people struggle or suffer or make mistakes, or, you know, heaven forbid, fail. And what do we do when we see someone struggling and about to fail at something? What are we called to do? Yeah, maybe it's this big heroic rescue, or like, I'm here to save the day, check me out. But more often than not, it's just extending this sort of hand of, help, let me help you. But what happens when the leader is helpful too early, too often? People don't learn. What else happens? As we starve people of vital learning they need. Yeah, and you know, we do irreparable damage to their reputation, the very thing that we're trying to protect, maybe even their self-confidence, and creating that dependency. What about the leader who's the pace setter? This is the person who's got a big, bold vision. They're going to set the pace. You know, I'm going to set the pace for quality, for excellence, for agility, for outreach, for fellowship. I'm going to set the pace, and other people will notice and they will follow, of course, right? Leadership by example. What actually happens when the leader gets out front, more than a car length ahead? Do people, I hear disengagement. You know, people don't race to catch up, do they? We'd like to think they do. What do we do when we make that split-second decision of, I can't keep up with that person? We hold back. You know, I learned this one a couple years ago. I've got 4 children. My youngest is